Jake stepped off the transport shuttle and looked up at the massive metal structure floating in space. The Galactic Wildlife Station orbited Kepler 442b, a distant planet that most humans never dreamed of visiting. The station was designed to house the most dangerous creatures in the known universe, animals so wild and unpredictable that no one dared keep them anywhere near populated worlds. He'd been given a simple assignment: work in Section 7. That's all they told him at first. When he finally asked what Section 7 actually contained, his new supervisor, a tall alien with 3 eyes named Krell, had looked at him with something like pity. "One creature," Krell said, his voice flat and emotionless. "A VRYNN. We call them lion beasts because of how they look, but honestly that comparison doesn't do them justice. They're far more dangerous than anything from your Earth history." Jake had heard about VRYNN before. Everyone in the Galactic Service had. Stories about their strength, their speed, their absolute refusal to be tamed or controlled. They were apex predators from a world where survival meant being ruthless and unforgiving. Over the past few months, 7 different zookeepers had been assigned to care for this particular VRN. All 7 had transferred out within weeks. Some said they'd quit out of fear. Others whispered about close calls with death. When Jake finally saw the creature, he understood why everyone had run. The VRYN was enormous. Its body was covered in thick, matted fur that had clearly gone unwashed for months. Its claws looked like daggers, each one probably as long as Jake's hand and twice as sharp. Its teeth were visible even when its mouth was closed, protruding slightly like yellowed tusks. But it was the creature's eyes that hit Jake the hardest. They weren't just angry or mean. There was something deeper there, something that looked a lot like complete despair. The beast paced back and forth in its reinforced habitat, a massive cage made of titanium-reinforced glass and steel. Every few minutes, it would slam itself against the barriers with bone-rattling force. The walls didn't budge, but the creature kept trying anyway, over and over, as if it had given up hope that anything would change but continued out of pure habit. "Don't get close to it," Krell warned him on Jake's first day. "Seriously. This isn't a gentle animal that you can bond with through kindness. This is a predator. A real one. It will kill you the moment you enter that habitat. It won't hesitate. It won't feel bad about it. That's just what they do." Jake nodded and accepted the warning without arguing. He'd learned long ago that contradicting your supervisor on a space station was a bad idea. They had the authority to send you home, and Jake wasn't ready to go home. He'd left Earth because he needed something different, something that mattered. Working with animals had always been his passion, even as a kid back in Colorado where he'd grown up. That passion had started simply enough. His family had a ranch and there were always injured animals that needed care. A bird with a broken wing, a deer hit by a car, a coyote caught in a fence. Young Jake had a way with them. He had patience that most kids didn't have, and he understood something that many people never learned. Scared animals were just scared. They weren't evil. They weren't out to hurt anyone. They just needed someone to show them that not everything in the world was dangerous. He'd studied animal behavior in college, worked at rehabilitation centers across North America, and eventually applied for the Galactic Wildlife Service. They'd accepted him almost immediately. Now here he was, staring at an alien creature that everyone else had given up on. As Jake stood at the observation window watching the VRYN pace, he felt something shift inside him. Everyone else saw a monster. Everyone else saw danger and madness and violent rage. But Jake had spent 15 years learning to look deeper than that. He could see the signs, the way the creature's movements weren't random. There was desperation in every motion. There was pain. That hollow look in those alien eyes wasn't just anger. It was loneliness. It was the expression of an intelligent being that had been abandoned and forgotten. Jake decided then and there that he wasn't going to run like the others. He was going to try something different. Jake's strategy was simple, though nobody else on the station seemed to understand it. He spent the first 2 weeks doing absolutely nothing but watching. Every single day he would walk into the observation room outside the VRNN's habitat and just sit there. He'd bring his lunch, his dinner, sometimes snacks, and he'd eat them slowly while staring at the creature through the reinforced glass. The other zookeepers thought he'd lost his mind. One of them, a woman named Riley who worked in the reptile section, actually asked him if he was feeling okay. "You're just sitting there," she said, watching him from the doorway. "You don't even move." "It's creepy." Jake shrugged. "I'm learning." "Learning what?" "That thing isn't going to suddenly become friendly because you stare at it." "Maybe not," Jake admitted. "But I'm learning how it thinks. How it moves. What makes it angry and what makes it calm down." Riley shook her head and walked away, probably convinced that Jake was one of those weird humans who took jobs on space stations because they couldn't function in normal society. Maybe she was right. But Jake didn't care what people thought. He'd learned that lesson a long time ago. The VRNN, for its part, seemed to notice Jake's presence. At first, it would roar whenever Jake entered the observation room, throwing itself against the barriers with violent intensity. But as the days passed, something changed. The roars became less frequent. The creature would still pace, but sometimes it would pause and look at Jake through the glass. Jake never made sudden movements. He never stared directly into the creature's eyes. He just sat there eating his food, existing in the same space, proving that he wasn't a threat. By the second week, Jake had started talking to the VRNN. Softly. Calmly. He talked about random things. His childhood in Colorado, the mountains he missed, the food from Earth that he couldn't get out here in space. He talked about his reasons for leaving home, about wanting to do something meaningful. He talked about his failures too, about the animals he couldn't save, about the times he tried his best and it still wasn't enough. The station staff definitely thought he was insane now. He'd catch them watching him through the observation window, shaking their heads, probably placing bets on when Jake would request a transfer like everyone else had. But something was happening that nobody else could see. The VRNN was listening. Not just hearing the sounds but actually listening. When Jake's voice got quieter, the creature would move closer to the glass. When Jake was excited about something he was talking about, the VRNN's ears would perk up slightly. On day 16, Jake made his decision. He walked into the equipment room and grabbed a specialized grooming tool, designed for large animals with soft bristles and a gentle touch. His hands were shaking as he got the tool ready. He knew how insane this was. He knew that the VRNN could kill him in about 2 seconds if it felt threatened. He knew that 7 other people had already quit this job. But he also knew that he'd come out here for a reason, and backing down now meant going home as a failure. Jake took a deep breath and input his access code into the habitat door. The alarm system beeped softly. The door slid open. The VRNN's head snapped up immediately. It let out a low growl that seemed to vibrate through Jake's bones. The creature was watching him intently now, every muscle tense and ready. Jake moved slowly. Deliberately. He didn't rush. He didn't make any sudden movements that could be interpreted as threatening. He spoke softly as he walked deeper into the habitat, his voice calm and steady. "Hey," Jake said gently. "I know you're scared. I know you're angry. But I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to help." The VRNN took a step toward him and Jake's heart nearly stopped. But he kept walking. He kept talking. He kept his movements smooth and predictable. When he got close enough, Jake slowly raised the grooming tool. The VRNN's body tensed. Could have attacked. It should have attacked. That's what a wild animal does when a stranger approaches with an unknown object. Instead, Jake began to gently work the grooming tool through the creature's matted fur near its shoulder. The VRNN froze completely. Jake could feel the tension in the creature's muscles, the barely contained energy coiled beneath that thick coat. But as he continued, moving the brush gently through the tangles, something shifted. The creature's breathing slowed. Its muscles relaxed slightly. Then Jake found it, a deep infection hidden beneath the matted fur, probably festering for weeks. The creature must have been in terrible pain. As Jake's fingers gently touched the infected area, the VRNN made a sound that Jake would never forget. It wasn't a roar. It wasn't a growl. It was a whimper. A sound of pain, yes, but also something else. Relief. Recognition. The sound of a suffering being finally being acknowledged by another soul. After that first grooming session, everything changed. Jake started going into the habitat every single day. It became his routine, his ritual, the thing that structured his entire week. He'd wake up, have breakfast, and head straight to Section 7. Every day without fail. The first week was still tense. The VRNN would watch him carefully, still suspicious, still ready to attack if Jake made any wrong move. But Jake kept talking. He kept moving slowly and deliberately. He kept his voice soft and calm. And gradually, something began to shift in the creature's eyes. On the 8th day of grooming sessions, Jake decided to give the creature a name. He'd been calling it the VRNN, or Subject 7 like everyone else, but that didn't feel right anymore. This wasn't just a specimen or a dangerous animal to be contained. This was an individual. A being with personality and pain and intelligence. "I'm going to call you Scar," Jake said one afternoon while working through a particularly nasty tangle of fur on the creature's back. "I read about it in an old Earth story. It means survivor. That's what you are, right? You've survived all this neglect, all this pain, all this time alone. You're a survivor." The creature made a soft sound, not quite a purr but something close to it, and pressed its massive head gently against Jake's shoulder. Jake felt his throat tighten. In that moment something clicked. The VRWN wasn't just accepting his help. It was asking for it. Over the next few weeks, Jake started expanding Scar's world. The habitat had been basically empty before, just a cage with automated food dispensers and cleaning systems. Jake worked with the station's engineering team to make improvements. He had them install climbing structures throughout the space, metal frames and platforms that gave Scar something to do besides pace back and forth. He brought in puzzle feeders, devices where Scar had to work to access food by moving pieces around or solving simple mechanical problems. At first, the creature had no idea what to do with them. But Jake was patient. He showed Scar how they worked, rewarding the beast with treats whenever it figured out a puzzle. Within days, Scar was solving them independently, and Jake could see the satisfaction in the creature's eyes when it succeeded. Jake also convinced the maintenance crew to expand the water pool in the habitat. The old one had been shallow and cramped. Now Scar had a proper deep pool where it could actually swim. The first time Jake filled it and opened the barriers, he watched as the massive creature dove in like a kid at a swimming hole. For the first time since Jake had arrived at the station, he saw Scar genuinely play. The creature splashed around, dove under the water, swam in circles. It was beautiful and heartbreaking all at once, watching something that had been denied basic joy finally experience it. But what really amazed Jake was how quickly Scar's intelligence became obvious. The creature learned the routine of grooming sessions. It would position itself to make Jake's work easier, turning to present different parts of its body that needed attention. It learned to recognize specific sounds that meant different things. The tone Jake used when he was about to do something that might hurt meant Scar should brace itself. A different tone meant everything was fine. Scar even started showing affection in ways that made it clear this wasn't just about survival instinct. The creature would gently touch Jake's shoulder with one massive claw, careful not to hurt him. It would make soft vocalizations when Jake arrived, almost like greeting sounds. Once, when Jake was sick and didn't come for 2 days, Scar refused to eat. When Jake finally returned, the creature pressed its entire head against his chest, and Jake swore he could feel something like emotion radiating from the beast. News of what was happening in Section 7 started spreading through the station. Other staff members began showing up at the observation window, curious about what Jake was doing. Some were skeptical. Some were amazed. The Xelian supervisor, Krell, came by one afternoon with his 3 eyes narrowed in that way that meant he was calculating probabilities. "This is statistically improbable," Krell said flatly. "The VRWN species has never shown capacity for this level of social bonding with other species. Your results contradict everything in our database." "Maybe your database is wrong," Jake replied simply, not looking away from where he was working on Scar's infected shoulder wound, which had finally healed completely. Several research teams started requesting access to study Scar. Scientists from the Synthetic Collective wanted to run behavioral tests. Xenobiologists wanted to take samples. Everyone suddenly wanted to understand what Jake had discovered. But Jake refused them all. "No," he said firmly. "Scar has been poked and prodded and neglected enough. This creature needs consistency and trust, not a parade of researchers running experiments." Krell seemed to accept this, though Jake could tell the supervisor didn't fully understand it. How could a being of pure logic comprehend that sometimes what matters most can't be measured or tested or analyzed? Sometimes it's just about showing up, day after day, and proving that you care. Within 3 months, the official records were updated. Subject 7 was reclassified from dangerous and unsuitable for rehabilitation to successfully rehabilitated. Health markers improved every single week. The infected wounds healed. Scar's coat became glossy and clean. The hollow despair faded from those alien eyes, replaced with something that looked a lot like hope. The alarm started blaring at 3:47 in the morning. Jake was sleeping in his quarters when the emergency broadcast woke him up. At first, he couldn't understand what they were saying through the static and noise. Then the message came through clear and urgent. "Mining vessel collision, multiple casualties, medical bay overwhelmed, all available personnel report immediately." Jake was out of bed and moving before his brain fully caught up. He threw on his work clothes and headed toward the medical section, but his mind kept pulling him back to Section 7. Scar. What would happen to Scar if Jake wasn't there? The creature had become dependent on the routine, on Jake's presence, on the daily care and attention. The medical bay was chaos when Jake arrived. He'd never seen anything like it. Miners with burns covering half their bodies. People with broken bones sticking through skin. Blood everywhere. The medical staff was moving frantically, trying to triage patients, trying to figure out who needed surgery first, who could wait, who might not make it no matter what they did. Dr. Reeves, the station's chief medical officer, took one look at Jake and pointed toward the worst cases. "We need hands," she said simply. "Help where you can." For the next hour, Jake did basic medical assistance. Holding things in place, applying bandages, moving patients to different sections of the bay. But as more injured people kept arriving from the damaged mining vessel, he realized something terrifying. They were running out of space. The medical bay had beds for maybe 20 critical patients. They already had 30. Dr. Reeves stood in the middle of the chaos, her hands shaking slightly, her eyes moving from patient to patient. Jake could see the moment she realized they didn't have enough resources. He could see the exact second when she understood that some of these people might die simply because there wasn't enough room or enough equipment or enough time. "We need more space," she said almost to herself. "We need something large enough to—" She stopped mid-sentence looking at Jake. "No," Jake said, knowing immediately what she was thinking. "Absolutely not. Jake, we need—" "I know what you need, but that's not the answer. Scar isn't equipment. Scar isn't a tool." Dr. Reeves grabbed his arm. "Then people die. Right now, in this room, people die because we don't have space for them. Is that what you want?" Jake looked around at the injured miners. He saw their pain, their fear, their desperate need for help. And he thought about Scar, about the trust that had been built over months, about the vulnerability the creature had shown him, about everything that could be destroyed if he betrayed that trust right now. But he also knew that Scar wasn't just a beast. Scar was intelligent. Scar was capable of understanding. And most importantly, Scar cared about Jake. Jake made a decision that would later be analyzed and discussed and debated across the entire galactic service. He ran back to Section 7. Scar was pacing when Jake entered, agitated from all the noise and alarm signals that had been blaring through the station. The creature immediately moved toward Jake, making those soft greeting sounds, pressing its head against him in that familiar way. "I need your help," Jake said, his voice steady even though his heart was pounding. "I know I've never asked this before. I know it's dangerous. But people are dying. And you're the only one who can help." Jake wasn't even sure if Scar understood the words. But the creature seemed to understand something. It followed Jake when he moved toward the habitat door. It didn't resist when Jake opened the barriers that it had been contained behind for so long. The creature could have run. It could have attacked someone. It could have done 1,000 dangerous things when it suddenly found itself free in the corridors of the space station for the first time. Instead, it followed Jake. Station security nearly opened fire when they saw the massive VRN moving through the hallways. Jake heard weapons being primed, heard the panicked voices of officers preparing to defend the station. But he stepped forward, putting himself directly between Scar and the security team. "Stand down," he said, his voice carrying absolute authority. "This creature is here to help. If you shoot, you answer to me." The security chief, a woman named Officer Torres, lowered her weapon slowly. "Jake, that's a VRN. That's Scar," Jake interrupted. "And Scar is the most intelligent, most trustworthy being I know." When they reached the medical bay, Dr. Reeves went pale. She opened her mouth to say something, but Jake was already guiding Scar into the space. "Stay," Jake told the creature simply. And Scar did something that no one in that room would ever forget. The massive alien creature lay down on the floor, making itself into a flat, stable platform. Its body was long enough and strong enough that it became something like a living gurney. Dr. Reeves understood immediately. She started directing medical staff to carefully place the most critically injured patients on Scar's body. The creature remained completely still, its breathing shallow and steady, providing a stable surface for the medical team to work on patients who needed immediate attention. For 6 hours, Scar didn't move. Not even once. Surgeons worked on patients lying on the creature's back. Nurses moved around it carefully. Monitors were attached to the injured miners. And through it all, Scar lay perfectly still, its massive body serving as a living operating table. Jake sat beside the creature's head the entire time, one hand on Scar's neck, feeling the steady heartbeat beneath the fur. He whispered to the creature constantly, thanking it, praising it, acknowledging what it was doing. When the last patient was stable and the surgeries were complete, Jake helped Scar stand up slowly. The creature's muscles must have been screaming in pain, but it didn't show any sign of distress. Instead, it turned its head and looked directly at Jake, and in those alien eyes, Jake saw something he'd never seen before: purpose. Scar had found meaning in helping, in being needed, in making a difference. As Jake led Scar back through the station corridors toward Section 7, the creature moved like a warrior who had just proven itself in battle. Its head was held high. Its stride was confident. This wasn't an animal returning to captivity. This was a being that had discovered it was capable of something greater than survival. The story of what happened in the medical bay spread through the station faster than any official announcement could have. Within hours, every person on the Galactic Wildlife Station knew about the VRYNN that had saved lives. But what started as a dramatic rescue story quickly became something much bigger, something that would reshape the entire field of xenobiology. Scientists from across the galaxy started requesting information about Scar. They wanted to understand how a supposedly mindless predator had demonstrated such remarkable compassion and intelligence. Research teams began reviewing the historical records of VRYNN behavior, looking at past incidents through a new lens. What they discovered was startling. The VRYNN weren't inherently violent monsters. They were traumatized beings. Creatures that had experienced generations of abuse, neglect, and misunderstanding at the hands of species that had classified them as too dangerous to rehabilitate. Dr. Helena Voss, a renowned xenobiologist from the Central Research Institute, came to the station personally to study Scar's case. She spent 3 days reviewing Jake's detailed logs of the rehabilitation process. Every grooming session, every introduction of enrichment, every small breakthrough documented carefully over those months. "This is extraordinary," Dr. Voss said, sitting across from Jake in the station cafeteria. She was an older woman, human, with gray streaking through her dark hair and eyes that had seen a lot of the galaxy. "Do you understand what you've done? You haven't just rehabilitated one creature. You've fundamentally challenged everything we thought we knew about an entire species." "I just treated Scar like any other traumatized animal," Jake said simply. "With patience, with consistency, with respect." "That's exactly the point," Dr. Voss replied. "Everyone else treated Scar like a monster. You treated Scar like a person." Within 2 weeks of the medical incident, the Galactic Council issued an official statement. VRYNN were no longer to be classified as dangerous predators unsuitable for rehabilitation. Instead, new protocols were established for understanding and working with traumatized alien species. And more importantly, Scar became the first VRYNN in over 100 years to be granted full rights under the Galactic Accords, the legal framework that protected sapient beings across known space. It was official now. Scar wasn't just a rescued animal. Scar was a person. The offers started coming almost immediately. Universities wanted Jake to head research departments. Private corporations offered him positions with salaries that made his head spin. The Galactic Wildlife Service offered him promotions, prestigious assignments, the kind of career advancement that most people dreamed about. One offer came from the prestigious Institute of Xenological Studies, offering Jake a position as director with authority over dozens of facilities and hundreds of researchers. Jake turned every single one of them down. Instead, he did something that surprised everyone at the station, including Krell. He proposed a new program, the Rehabilitation and Integration Initiative. The idea was simple but revolutionary. Instead of warehousing difficult or ineducable species in containment facilities, the initiative would focus on understanding trauma, providing proper care, and rehabilitating creatures that everyone else had given up on. "You want to do this here?" Krell asked, his 3 eyes blinking in that pattern that meant he was processing complex information. "At this station?" "Yes," Jake said. "This is where it started. This is where Scar showed everyone what's possible. This should be where we prove it can be done again and again and again." Krell was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that Jake had never heard from the Xelian supervisor before. "I approve. I will help." The initiative grew faster than anyone expected. Other zookeepers, inspired by what Jake had accomplished with Scar, started applying for positions. Scientists who had been skeptical about alternative approaches to animal rehabilitation began contributing research and insights. Slowly but surely, the program expanded to include dozens of species that had been deemed problem animals, creatures that nobody else wanted to work with, that had been written off as incapable of change. Most importantly, it worked. A Krell warrior that had been violent and unpredictable responded to consistent care and enrichment. A synthetic intelligence that had been malfunctioning began operating perfectly again when given proper maintenance and respect. Species after species showed that what they'd been labeled as wasn't their true nature. It was the result of trauma, neglect, and misunderstanding. But the real celebration came on the day they opened Scar's new habitat. It wasn't a cage anymore. It was a sprawling, magnificent space that had taken months to design and build. There were cliffs to climb, forests to explore, rivers to swim in, and open sky above, or at least the best simulation of open sky that an orbital station could provide. The habitat was designed not as a containment facility but as a home. A place where Scar could be what it was meant to be. The entire station turned out for the opening ceremony. Jake stood at the entrance to the new habitat beside Krell and Dr. Voss. Scientists, researchers, medical personnel, security officers. Everyone who had doubted Jake or supported him or simply watched the transformation happen. They all gathered to witness this moment. Jake opened the barriers and Scar walked out into the new space for the first time. The creature moved slowly at first, cautiously, as if not quite believing that this was real. Then it began to explore. It climbed the artificial cliffs with powerful, graceful movements. It dove into the river with a splash that sent water everywhere. It made sounds, not roars or growls but something that sounded almost like joy. Then Scar came back to Jake. The massive creature bent down, lowering its enormous head, and pressed it gently against Jake's chest. For a moment, everything was quiet. The thousands of conversations happening around them seemed to fade away. It was just Jake and Scar, the human and the VRYN, in a moment that perfectly captured everything that this journey had been about. Krell stepped forward and placed one of his three-fingered hands on Jake's shoulder. "You taught us something important," the Xelian supervisor said quietly. "You taught us that compassion is not weakness. That patience is not naivety. That understanding is more powerful than force. I was wrong about many things. You were right." Jake looked at the Xelian, then back at Scar, then out at the crowd of beings from a dozen different species, all gathered here because one human had refused to give up on something that everyone else had written off as impossible. "Scar taught us," Jake corrected gently. "All I did was listen." He watched as Scar moved freely through the magnificent habitat, alive and vibrant and genuinely happy in a way that it had never been allowed to be before. The creature climbed, played, explored, and occasionally came back to check on Jake as if making sure he was still there. The galaxy, Jake realized, still had so much room to learn. And it was going to take beings like Scar, beings that refused to accept the labels others put on them, to teach it.